So, the good old USA is home to a number of very famous flags. There is the Stars and Stripes, of course, and the flag of the old Confederacy. Then there's the Betsy Ross flag, and the LGBT Pride flag, and the Texas flag, and the Don't Tread on Me one. But there's also a lot of more obscure American flags out there too. Let us look at a couple. But before I begin, I just wanted to note that today's video was brought to you, wonderful people, by our good friends at Skillshare. We shall talk more about Skillshare in a bit. So, a number of times when I have gone to the States, I have seen this flag flying from government buildings. Do you know what it is? It is the POW MIA flag, and it is kind of a relic from a sort of forgotten political fight from the 1980s. So, the Vietnam War was obviously one of the most controversial episodes of American history. In fact, in some ways you could even say it was sort of the origin of the modern left versus right American political divide. In the 1970s, American conservatives were all generally pro the Vietnam War. And until the very end of that conflict, and even for some time afterwards, conservatives maintained that the motivation for going to war against the Vietnamese communists was morally just, even if the war itself was this giant failure. And one of the ways they made the case for the war being morally just was to focus on the actions of the Vietnamese communists, who were often very violent and oppressive, as communists tend to be. In particular, Americans of this sort made a big deal of the way that the Vietnamese communists treated the American soldiers that they captured, and even after the war ended in 1975, recovering all of the American POWs from Vietnam remained this big political issue with Republicans, especially once America began edging towards establishing normal, peaceful relations with communist Vietnam under Jimmy Carter. The POW flag, which had been created in the 1970s, thus emerged during the 1980s as this kind of conservative culture war symbol. The flag also became an important symbol to veterans of the Vietnam War. As mainstream American culture became more universally hostile to the memory of the war in Vietnam, the flag became one of the few remaining symbols of American culture that still portrayed the war in a semi-sympathetic light. In 1990, Congress passed a law giving the POW MIA flag official status and required it to be flown at various government buildings on important days. And that's still the case today, even as the Vietnam War fades further and further into America's collective memory. Another flag with deep roots in American cultural history is this one here. This is supposed to be the flag of Black Americans. Well, actually, it is a little bit more complicated than that. See, back in the early 20th century, there was this famous guy called Marcus Garvey, who was this very aggressive activist for the rights of African Americans, but also black people more generally. He was actually primarily interested in the idea of black racial consciousness because he considered most of the countries that black people lived in at that time to be artificial colonial constructions. In 1920, Garvey hosted this big international conference in New York City with representatives of black people from all over the world. And among other things, they hammered out a few universal symbols for peoples of the African race. And one of them was a flag of red, black, and green. Red for the blood of suffering, green for nature, and black for blackness. This flag never really caught on with blacks in America, although when a few African countries were freed from European rule in the mid-20th century, they chose to use a modified version of the Garvey flag as their own, including Libya, Kenya, and Malawi. During the next great wave of black activism in the 1960s, the Garvey flag came briefly back into fashion, particularly with some of the more extreme folks like the Black Panthers, who, much like Garvey himself, were really into, racial separatism. But in the end, it was simply the flag's colors that had the longest legacy. Even if you don't see the flag itself in America much these days, the colors have become a somewhat common symbol in patriotic African American stuff, particularly stuff that encourages African Americans to associate with traditional African cultures. A good example would be the African American holiday of Kwanzaa, where black, green, and red tend to be the traditional colors of decorations and things. For example, the candles in the traditional Kwanzaa menorah, known as the Kinaura, are always red, black, and green. Now, when we think of the flags of the American Revolution, we usually think of this one with the stars in the circle, or sometimes the Don't Tread on Me flag, which is still a somewhat controversial symbol of American resistance to this day. But there used to be quite a few other flags associated with the American Revolution as well, although they've mostly fallen into obscurity these days. Only a couple remain somewhat well known, either because they have very distinctive designs or they're associated with a particularly important state or battle. There is these two flags, for example, with the Union Jacks. These were the flags of the earliest stage of the Revolution, back when the colonists were protesting the British government but had not yet crossed the line into wanting complete independence from Britain. You can see one of them here in this famous picture of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Then there's this flag, which was flown at the famous Battle of Bennington in 1777. Some people consider this the very first version of the Stars and Stripes, and by some people, I mean the Bennington Historical Society. The reason why you might recognize it is because it had a brief revival of popularity during the American bicentennial celebrations of 1976, for obvious reasons. This was the flag of colonial Massachusetts and would have been the flag that a lot of Massachusetts people would have rallied behind during the War for Independence. It would later become a somewhat well-known symbol of the Revolution because of its presence in this famous painting of the Battle of Bunker Hill. It used to have the English cross in the top corner too, but from what I read, a lot of the Puritans in Massachusetts thought it was blasphemous to have a cross on a flag. Speaking of Massachusetts, during the war, the Massachusetts rebel government authorized this flag to fly on all of their ships. An appeal to heaven, it says. Good example of sucking up to God during war. This is still a somewhat popular flag among some Massachusetts folk to this day. I see they even brought it to the South Pole. By the way, the reason this flag looks so lame is because none of us really know what it actually looked like. There exist no surviving appeal to heaven flags or even pictures of it. All we have is records of people talking about a flag with a tree and the words appeal to heaven on it. And if you're only operating on a very vague description like that, it's easy to come up with a pretty pathetic drawing. Like, imagine if the only thing we knew about the Canadian flag was that it had a maple leaf and 2 red stripes. You'd probably wind up with a lot of historians drawing stuff like this. And then there's this one, the flag of the Vermont Rebel Militia, also known by the charming name, the Flag of the Green Mountain Boys. This was another flag that supposedly flew at the Battle of Bennington. So once again, we can thank the all-powerful Bennington Historical Society for keeping the memory of this one alive. You can really see how the Stars and Stripes was kind of a gradual evolution from a number of flags of the Revolutionary era, eh? Even though I know that a lot of non-Americans have this idea that Americans all worship the Stars and Stripes, it's actually not that unusual to modify the flag for political purposes. For example, in any big American city, you may occasionally see this version of the flag. This is basically the American Cop Awareness flag with the blue stripe representing the so-called thin blue line of police authority. It's a particularly common symbol for honoring police officers killed in the line of duty. In recent years, the firefighters of America have created their own version as well, with a thin red line, even though I'm not sure anyone's ever used that particular metaphor before. Unless there be any tension between these two groups of American heroes, there is now also a joint police and firefighters flag, although I noticed there is still a lot of jockeying over whose stripe comes first. And lastly, have you ever seen this version of the Stars and Stripes? This is a modified version of the flag designed to honor the US Secret Service, whose crest is right here. Now, for reasons I really do not understand and have not been able to find any clear information on, for some reason this version of the flag has become particularly beloved by Republicans, particularly a certain subset of Republicans in the media who like to wear little pins of it. Folks like Sean Hannity and Lou Dobbs and Charlie Kirk wear it almost all the time. Supposedly this was a tradition started by Mitt Romney, of all people. But yeah, it's a very weird phenomenon that I'm sure you'll notice all the time now that I've pointed it out. But if you want to focus your attention on something a lot more worthwhile, may I suggest today's video sponsor, Skillshare. So as you know, Skillshare is the internet's best source for high quality video tutorials that can teach you how to do just about anything, be it in the realm of art, design, technology, finance, business, or just general self-improvement. But did you know that another very cool thing about Skillshare is that various internet famous people are sometimes the ones teaching the tutorials? For instance, I was recently just watching a class by noted internet comedy man Matt Belisai that was all about how to be a more successful internet media personality. He had a lot of good tips about how to create genuinely compelling content that people will want to like and share and click on. And I took him seriously because of course he's way more popular than me. So give Skillshare a try. You might be surprised to find out who's teaching some of the classes. If you sign up to Skillshare using the link in the thing below, you'll get 2 free months of unlimited access to everything the site has to offer. So do not wait, give Skillshare a try today. Thank you so much for watching this video. Do not forget to like and subscribe, and please let me know if you have any other good nominees for an obscure American flag or a lesser known American thing in general. I know a lot of foreign people like to think that they know everything that is possible to know about America just because they watch a lot of American movies or whatever, but I always think it's a lot of fun to call attention to some of the more hidden facts of American life that only true Americans know. I will see you all next week.
The legions of Hampshire and York, they claim our possession, the pitiful knaves. The tribute we pay shall be prisons and graves. And cheer, cheer the Green Mountaineer, and cheer.